I'm going to call the meeting to order at 7:01. Rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and welcome to our March 27th Committee of the Whole meeting for the Milford Board of Education. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dr. Pieser for our presentations this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Glenn, and good evening to the board members and to staff and parents and other visitors. So it's kind of an exciting evening with the art show going on, which is fabulous. I'm always amazed at the talent of our students, which is a real reflection on our teachers, I think, the way they stretch the kids. So, but this evening we are going to begin with speaking about the area of special education, and in particular to provide the board with an update on the District Management Council's special ed audit that was conducted in the 12-13 school year. They began in the fall of 2012 and finished their audit in the spring of 2013, and that's when the report was issued, which you've all been given a copy of the report. And I would just like to give a little background, since I know that there are only two members of the board that were on the board at that time, Mrs. Tobias and Mrs. Glennon.
And Mr. Wiskman.
Oh, Mr. Wiskman. I'm so sorry, Mr. Wiskman. Sorry about that. And actually, when I was hired, I began in April of 2011. That board had said that they wanted to have a special education audit conducted. It wasn't able to be done when I first came in. It was the following year, and an election had occurred, and there were a number of new board members, etc. But as you have within your packet, you see that we actually put an RFP together. We sent that out, and we received, I believe it was 4 applications, and they were very different in their scope and what they emphasized, what their priorities were, etc. And the board was really struck by the presentation from the District Management Council, which is now the District Management Group, and they were struck by 2 very important pieces. One, the DMC said to us, if we come in, please know that we are going to conduct an audit that will involve both regular education as well as special education, which actually distinguished them because all of the others were really focusing in only on special education. And then the second thing they said to us is, we will not be giving you a set of 20 or 25 recommendations. We will be giving you 3 or 4. That's how we operate. And then they also went on to provide some data tied to special education identification and how reading becomes one of the primary entry points oftentimes for special education, because the children are not receiving the best supports in reading that they might be able to. So the long and the short of it is that the board selected the DMC to conduct the audit, and then the audit, as I said, went on for about, I would say, 5 or 6 months, and it involved a collection of a massive set of data, and then there were interviews of parent groups, teachers, administrators. There were some observations, if my memory served me correctly, because they were really trying to get a feel for the district. And then with all of that information that they had gleaned, and part of that information that they also had gathered had to do with our service delivery. And they looked at how we delivered reading, etc. You then see, if you read the report, that what emerged were 4 basic sets of recommendations. Each one's pretty meaty in as far as what they're saying, but there's 4 major themes to those recommendations. And we were, it was exciting on the one hand. It was a little unnerving on the other, because it was the very first time the district had ever done something like this. It begged a lot of really important questions, the actual report itself, which are going to be addressed this evening. And quite honestly, that report, which we took very, very, very seriously, became a catalyst for some significant change occurring within the district. So I'm not going to move into that piece because there's others that we want to make sure that we hear from, but I just wanted to make sure that you understood how this was brought about. The board, subsequent to the report being given, the then board asked us to develop a plan. We did a preliminary plan, which we presented then in the fall of 2013. The board wanted more than what was in there, so we went back to the drawing board and we actually presented a very detailed plan in the spring of 2014 of work that we were going to pursue. And again, some of that will be addressed this evening as well. So with that, unless there's some questions, I was going to turn it over to Carol Swift to lead off on this.
Well, good evening, everybody. So I'll give you a quick overview of what we hope to accomplish this evening. So Betty just gave you the audit background. We'll go through an update of the 4 different opportunities. We have some school teams here to talk tonight about how they have, how they exemplify the partnership between special ed and regular education. And then in the end, we'll go through some of the data on special ed students. So this slide really is what Betty encapsulated in her opening. So I am actually going to start with opportunity 3, which is out of order, but it seems to be the most fitting opportunity to review first, because, you know, as you know, this was a special ed audit, but it really drove home, I think, the strong connection between strong regular ed and strong special ed services and how critical both pieces are, and that a strong partnership needs to exist between the two. And so opportunity 3 really is about the roles and responsibilities of both special ed and regular educators, as well as the partnership or workings between and across those 2 departments. So it seemed to make the most sense to us to present to you what's been happening with opportunity 3 first, to kind of lay the groundwork for the other opportunities. So anyhow, let's see here. When this report came out, I was a principal and was able to give input to the opportunities review, see the report come out, and now fast forward a few years, here I am the director of pupil personnel for 8 months in a very different seat. So I feel as though I have kind of a unique perspective here, because I feel as though I've been on that very regular ed side of things and now very much on a very special ed side of things. So anyways, what I can say about what I know about in the past is special ed would often hire, train, and evaluate special educators, as well as teach special ed students. And the same was true for regular education department. They hired their regular education teachers, they trained them, they evaluated them, and regular educators taught regular ed students. So we had a role and a purpose and a position, and we kind of worked alongside of each other with our own people, if you will. And what I want to illuminate for you this evening is how we really have we've moved into a really close partnership, realizing that we need to work together, and when we work together on all those things, that we end up with a stronger team and a better ability to meet the needs of kids. So anyhow, if we take a look here at the overall opportunity 3, it was again to establish clear roles and responsibilities of leaders in regular ed and special ed, and increase the coordination and planning between them. And I'm sure you read through the report. So there were these 3 different subcategories of the opportunity: the reporting lines, the regular ed being responsible for the education of all kids, including students with mild and moderate disabilities, and then special ed taking the leadership with their very specialized programs. So if we move here, let me see that. One of the things that I wanted to point out before we get to this is I think what we've realized so much more recently is that the reason why we're so dependent on one another is together we create this continuous loop. So we have regular ed curriculum and instructional supervisors who lead regular education to develop a very strong core program. Then we work collaboratively to be sure we have strong tiers of intervention. Then the special ed department gets a lot of initial evals for kids for whom those two things, the core instruction and the tiered instruction, are not meeting their needs. And through all those initial evaluations, we start noticing patterns, whether it's patterns of weaknesses that the kids have, or patterns in kind of the instructional approach we've used with kids. And so what's important then is that we take this information from our initial evals and feed it back to the instructional supervisors so that they can address kind of when we have too much of a pattern, that they can address it back in the curriculum. And we've realized that that continuous loop is so important, and therefore when we can really work together, it strengthens the whole process all the way through. So what I wanted to talk about specifically with Opportunity One is how the roles and responsibilities have been clarified. And if I could do it in a nutshell, what I would say is everything goes through the building principal now. There was a time when none of us were really sure, like, okay, so if I have this specialized program in my building, who does that teacher report to? Do they come to me? But I don't have the controls to support that person. And what we've realized is the principal has to be aware of everything that's going on in their building, because at the end of the day, the principal is the one who's always there with the program and the children. So that has been a big difference across the last couple of years, and as a result of this. Also, principals are involved in the work of all staff in all programs. So there was a time when PD was happening where special ed teachers would go and meet with the special ed supervisors, and regular ed teachers would stay with the building principal, and there the two shall meet. And we realized that that really results in a deficit model, and we all just kind of have to work together and be sure people know the same things. The other thing that's important here, and I should have put principals and all administrators hire and evaluate all staff. So in the past, we did it very separately, and now we have a very different mindset that we all need to be able to evaluate good instruction regardless of who's instructing. And similarly, we also need to hire for the district, not for our buildings, not for our programs, but knowing that whoever we hire could end up anywhere in the district. And so we have to be sure that who we're hiring makes sense for Milford Public Schools and not for special ed and not for regular ed. And that has been a big change in practice in how we go about hiring. We have panels of people who represent all the different departments for whoever we hire. So that's been a huge change. And then special education administrators, well, principals need to know everything that's going on in their building. The special ed administrators are there to support the principals and the school teams back in the building. So any type of support that might revolve around co-teaching, inclusion, pull-out support, related services support, things like PD for a very specialized disability that might come through, those type of very responsive supports, in addition to, of course, planning the specialized programs and whatnot, which I'll talk about in a little bit more time. So, and then I think the second category here where we talked about students, I'm sorry, I'm getting lost here. How regular ed is responsible for all students. There has been a huge shift in mindset from when I was a beginning principal and when I concluded as a principal. The change in the staff within the building was incredible. One of, I don't teach those children. That's extreme, and I'm exaggerating, but the special ed teacher is responsible for that child. I don't provide reading instruction for that child. So very much, all kids are regular ed students first, and that all students with IEPs are instructed by their regular education teacher. And that is a practice that has strengthened tremendously over the last few years. And is true for many of our students in self-contained programs as well. That when they're out and included in their regular ed classrooms, that they are instructed by their regular ed teacher as well. And that regular ed teachers now provide tiered levels of support or instruction for all kids. And then interventionists are trained in core curriculum, core assessments, diagnostic assessments, and reading interventionists and reading interventions. So when I write interventionists there, it's regular ed reading teachers and it's also special educators. So we think of them now as, interventionists, and where their skill set lies is how they will be supporting kids. So we are very mindful to the fact that it's important that our special educators be very aware of what's going on in our core curriculum, any of the changes that are happening there, because we want our instruction to not confuse kids and do something that's very separate and different looking for kids who may struggle and need an intervention, and we want it to align. And so it's critical that special educators and reading teachers are very cognizant of what kind of instruction is happening in the classroom. And then this didn't fit on the previous slide, so it really belongs under regular ed is responsible for all students. Our shift to the workshop model for reading and math instruction is so supportive of differentiation to meet the needs of students. So, for example, in a reading lesson, it may focus on one specific strategy that you teach to all the children and you model to all the children, and then they take a book at their level back and they practice that strategy at their level. So they're able to participate very much in what all kids are learning, whether you have a child who's performing above grade level, they're in a very sophisticated text, and then you might have some kids in texts that are below grade level, but they're still able to learn that strategy and apply it. And so the workshop model has been very beneficial to making sure that regular ed is responsible for all students. And then when we think of specialized programs, while they really are administered by our special ed leadership, meaning they figure out where the kids are going, to whom are they going, what kind of supports are needed, there is such a collaboration between the building leadership and school teams, because the special ed administrators can't lead that program on a day-to-day basis. It goes back to the building principal and to the school teams that support those specialized programs. They're the ones that deal with those day-to-day issues that happen. So there again, we can't really separate ourselves even in this realm. We very much have to be in close partnership, because we can't carry these programs out without the support of building principals and without the support of the school teams. And with any one of these specialized programs, the goal for all kids always is to be included as much as possible in the general ed setting. So I don't know if you had a chance to see the paperwork that I wanted to be shared with you prior to this evening, that we tried to put special education on paper, which is kind of a tricky thing to do. But if you looked through there and you saw a program that was deemed self-contained, please know that when you see self-contained, it doesn't mean what I think it used to mean, which is at 8 o'clock, you go in that room at the start of the day, you might come out for lunch or for gym, and then, you're there for the whole day. It's not what that term means any longer. How I like to think about it is, if the child needs a separate setting, it's there for them, depending on whatever's going on with them at the time. So perhaps someone's having difficulty emotionally that day, and they can't handle a whole class for math, for example. They might be in their self-contained classroom for math that day and not included. But on most days, we're striving for them to be included, for sure. Some of the next steps for Opportunity 3 is that we know that our collaboration, communication, and partnership between special ed and regular ed has to continue. And some of the key areas where we always are reminding ourselves still is, okay, when we're doing curriculum writing, let's get a special educator on that team, because that perspective is so important. Professional learning, whenever we're doing any kind of district team, we have to be sure that there's even representation. And when we're doing specialized things for the special ed department, it's important for us to pull in a regular ed perspective on that as well. Professional growth opportunities, some of the things that we're seeing happen now and that we really want to stress in the future is we're seeing some nice partnerships between regular ed teachers and special ed teachers engaging in their professional growth opportunities. So choosing something that they want to learn more about and then do some teaching with kids in partnership as their professional growth opportunity, which is part of the teacher evaluation system. We're seeing a lot of that. We want to see a lot more of that, because we know that that approach can be very powerful and helpful for kids, benefit kids. And then the other focus area for us too is to really work collaboratively to be sure that we're teaching all teachers how to work with kids with different profiles. So we have a different profile of student coming forward to us, kids who struggle to cope, kids who really, things that most kids could handle, they're having a hard time with. And so we're realizing that it's not just us developing, getting more behaviorists, or we have to develop the agency of all of our teachers so that they know how to handle the changing profile of kids that are coming to us at age 3 and all the way up. So that is some of our next steps in our collaboration moving forward, that we know we can't work in isolation, and we have to share that work. So that is Opportunity 3 in a nutshell, where we have gone and where we are headed. Does anyone have any questions about Opportunity 3?
Federico?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just trying to get a sense of, it sounds like there were some pretty significant changes, especially with the everything going through the building principal and the regular ed teachers being more involved. Can you give us a sense of when those changes occurred? Like, has it only been in place this school year? Has it been in place a couple of school years?
I think it's been across a few school years.
Okay.
I think, yeah, there were some strategic moves that occurred. I think, I know the ad council piece where Betty meets with building principals, and all information filters through principals, was really a message sent to all of us that, okay, we are the lead, we have to know what's going on in our building. And so we knew that it was incumbent upon us to know everything about all the different programs. So I'm speaking as a principal now, so I could answer to anything that was happening in my building, and that I wouldn't have to call one of the supervisors to say, oh, can you tell me about this? I'm really not sure. And so I think that was something that was very powerful and made that shift necessary. But I think out of that, we just realized that we're better together. We're better when we collaborate. We've done some things with the reconfigurations too, where especially the second reconfiguration, I think the silver lining to that is we really realized how important it is to get every perspective and really work together in planning and moving forward. So there were a lot of things that happened that I think including this report that kind of pointed it out to us that we're operating in silos and how are you going to fix that. But then I think there was like a positive snowball that took place that made us say, you know, we have to do more of this and get better at this.
I would just add to that, so the first year, we were still trying to absorb it all. Quite honestly, there was a lot of defensiveness on the part of regular ed as well as special ed. I think some of you probably remember that, and rightfully so, because what it was, we were pushing against the tide with respect to what had existed in the school system, and what had existed in the school system, quite frankly, was common in most school systems across the country. I mean, it was how the whole Individuals with Disabilities Act, when it was created, et cetera, special ed was special. It was it was here, and then there was regular ed, and there was just this separation between and among the programs. So it took time. But what started to happen, there were some things I think that we began to do immediately. Curriculum work. We just kind of put the gauntlet down and said there will be special ed teachers on all the curriculum committees that are put together. We said, special ed and regular ed administrators need to start talking to one another about the kids that are in the schools, et cetera. And again, it was hard for administrators, it was hard for classroom teachers, because it was asking people to think differently. All teachers, they guard their kids. These are my kids. Well, we were saying, these are your kids, but they're also our kids. So in a school, all kids were the responsibility of that faculty and that administration. It wasn't, here's the special ed wing, and here's the rest of the school. So it was sort of over time, but I would say 3 years ago is when things really started, I think, to take hold, because there had been some very concrete steps taken. People were fearful that they were going to lose their jobs, because we were talking about the possibility of having, were there times when some special ed kids might receive reading support from a reading interventionist, and when we finally got over that hurdle and people saw we're not trying to have anybody lose their job, this is about how do we best service kids. So a lot of it was helping people understand is, look at this could be really even be better for kids, because the more we can work together and service kids, the better for everybody. So it was a process, but fast forward, that report came out 4 years ago, but the work began, 5 years ago in the fall. We've done a lot, but it was countless special ed and regular ed teachers really working hard to make the shifts and do the work that was necessary to make it happen.
Okay, because my second question was, are you hearing feedback from parents and others on the shift? So I was trying to get a sense of how long that shift has been in place to know if you've had enough time to hear feedback. So it seems it's been about 3 years, so.
The feedback from parents in what way? I'm not sure what you're asking.
I mean, have people noticed that there's been, a change in the way things are structured, flowing through the principals? Are you seeing an impact? Are you hearing?
I don't know if parents would be as aware, but certainly staff are very aware.
Okay.
It's definitely, I don't know that a parent would have known, who answered to whom. I don't know.
Mrs. Courier was going to add something.
Hi, good evening. What I'd like to add from just the building principal perspective from my school that I can share is that I'm not sure if parents are aware of how the changes are that have taken place, but I think what's really gratifying in our work is when parents leave the meeting with a feeling that the entire team really understands their students. And I'm very lucky to oftentimes get the comments that's really directed to the team if it's not put into the meeting, but to say, wow, I feel like everybody really had a voice in helping to know and understand what my child needs, sharing through those different lenses, but to get that whole cohesive picture. And I do think that through the work, I've been in the district, this is my 5th year, I think we're really starting to have parents feel that they are very much more part of that team, and that the entire team is really adding on versus one person taking the lead. So that might be a nice example of where we're hearing that from the parent community.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
That was a great example. Thanks, Liz. Any other questions? So I will hand this over now to Jen Farrell.
Thank you.
For opportunity one.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carol. You set this up beautifully to talk a little bit about the work that we've accomplished This is my 4th year in district. So when I got here, this was part of our charge moving forward to say, you know what? We're going to take a look at how we're teaching kids how to read. So what does that mean in our, at the time, K3, K2, 3, 5 world, and now we're in the K5 world. And I have to say, I feel like my timing coming here to Milford was perfect because it's been exciting work. Teachers have been amazing, coaches have been amazing, collaboration with my principal colleagues, and now having Carol here at Central Office to work in collaboration with special ed, things are coming along beautifully. So I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes about all the work that we've been doing at the elementary level. So the team came together to talk about some 4 subcategories within Opportunity 1, including clarifying the role, again, of the regular educator and taking responsibility for reading instruction, to develop a strong literacy vision for how we're going to teach reading. So not only who is doing it, but how are we going to get the job done? And to make sure that within that plan, we were able to plan appropriately as far as time goes for kids. So when a student needs some extra time on task with particular skills, how are we going to accomplish that? And finally, last but not least, growing in our ability to use data effectively. So that was our charge. And as I said before, we've been working really hard, Carol spoke to, moving towards a workshop model. You know, balanced literacy is the way that we approach instruction here in Milford. So we've got a readers and a writers workshop model in place at the elementary and moving into both the middle school and the high school, where students are strongly invested in reading a just right text at their level so they can build stamina while getting direct instruction to provide them the skills they need to build their strength. So we've really taken this awesome workshop model, brought it to Milford students, and the board's been very supportive of that, so we thank you. We've got beautiful libraries where our kids are working high interest books. You go into our elementary classrooms, kids are reading, and they're curled up, and they're engaged and invested in the book. I can't even explain to you how wonderful an experience it is if you go into a kindergarten classroom and you see these beautiful kids invested in talking about who they are as a reader. It's just wonderful. So we really believe that we want kids in with core classroom teachers. We want them working with their classroom until they may need something additional. So we work to have teachers, reading teachers or reading interventionists, which could be a special education teacher, push in when appropriate, or sometimes go above and beyond the core and deliver instruction. The team makes sure that they come together with the building principal, reading teachers, elementary lit coaches, to design and implement a plan for each kiddo who needs that additional time on task with reading. And we've also grown in our ability to use assessment. For example, NWEA is a big piece that we use, and we've also moved to the benchmark assessment system in K-8. So as we said, up till now, Readers and Writers Workshop has been put in place. We also have worked with our elementary colleagues to build a new schedule to make sure that we've got time that's common where interventionists can push in when appropriate, and also building time specific for reading teachers to work with classroom teachers to build that relationship so we're all working towards the same goals in reading. That's really important to our work. We've worked on units of study that are now aligned to the Common Core state standards and dug into that with another level work around informational text for elementary, which was a huge push. And last but not least, through the work of our building principals, our lit coaches, and our reading team, really building targeted professional learning opportunities for our teachers and continuing to grow in our work as a collaborative group. So next step, I'm so sorry,
For
Dr.
a second
Susan.
before you move to next steps,
Yes,
can you
ma'am.
talk about that? What was the impact in terms of special ed, regular ed?
It's been wonderful because we believe at our core that without that collaboration, we all have our specialty areas. Reading teachers know reading. Special education teachers know how to modify and adjust curriculum, learning tasks to meet the needs of specific cognitive needs within a student for reading. Classroom teachers are experts at everything. They're just amazing. So when you have that continued collaboration, when your work is in complement with special education and reading intervention and reading teams and the classroom teacher, that's where we have our biggest impact, because you've got this team approach with our student learning need right at its center.
Did you also not have a lot of professional development for both regular ed as well as special ed around the reading program, because it was
Yes.
imperative that special ed understood what was the reading how the reading was approached, so that they weren't working in
Absolutely.
contrary
Yes,
ways?
yes, that's a great point, thank you. Our reading coaches, our elementary lit coaches, come together and we plan comprehensive professional learning that's usually rolled back to the building level. And special education teachers are directly involved with that particular professional learning. Also, as we've brought in new approaches to reading intervention, for example, the level literacy work, we also invited special education teachers to attend a training alongside with our reading teachers. And we meet regularly as a team with our reading teachers, and as appropriate, we invite different members of special education to the table. So that's been ongoing for a couple of years now. Does that make sense? Okay. So next steps, we're going to take a look at the way we're looking at data. You know, we've got a lot of beautiful data, we've got a lot of beautiful information that we've gathered about our kiddos. So what's our next step in analyzing that data so that we can continue to best meet the learning needs of our kids? We're going to be reviewing, again, in that constant pursuit of professional excellence, the way that we're working with our SAT teams. So when we bring kids up for concern around reading, are we using the same frame to discuss reading and what a kiddo might need next within their reading skills? And finally, last but not least, but as we continue to learn more about deficits in reading, there's more and more research keeps coming out about brain research and what that means for a reader, and if a reader's struggling, we continue to infuse that into best practices that we currently have, and to ensure that we are giving our kids the most targeted, meaningful instruction in order to close that achievement gap in reading.
And does that include special education students?
Yes,
Can you speak
absolutely.
to that a little bit?
Sure. So when we're talking about intervention practices, we talk about not only programs, but we're also next steps including goals. So we may say, if a student is showing this type of a learning profile around reading, what's an appropriate 6 to 8 week goal for this particular student? And then who would be best suited to deliver that instruction? And that could be a reading interventionist, which could be a special education teacher, it could be a reading teacher, or it's something that could happen within core classroom time as well, contingent on what the need is. Okay? So that's it for opportunity one. I would love to entertain some questions. Sir?
How much time each day is spent on literacy?
It depends by grade level. So now, and Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, K2 we're looking at 90 minutes for reading and additional time for interactive read aloud and phonics work as needed.
Yeah, it's at least the 60 minutes for the reader's workshop, but then your writer's workshop, which is part of that balanced literacy, is at least 45 minutes to an hour. And you're correct, the IRA and shared reading is about 15 to 20 minutes each daily for the K through 2.
And we keep talking about collaboration.
Yes.
How much of this collaboration is taking away from actual teaching time?
I would say that individual schools make it a priority to not take time away from instruction. We know instructional minutes, every minute counts. So I know building principals, when I worked as a building leader, you get very creative with your schedule and you eke out time where you can, but we don't want to take, one of our priorities here in the district is to not take teachers out from being in front of kids. That's a high priority, and I don't know if I'm not speaking, I'll turn that from the building, or Dr. Dudley, you're here as well. Yeah.
Sure, I feel bad, I'm not standing up, maybe I should. Pardon me for, that's rude. No, actually, it does depend on the building and really how your schedule looks, but this year, especially at the elementary level, we've added collaboration times, a lot more collaboration times that come out with our specialist schedule, so it's not taking away from teaching time. It is a time for teachers and of all kinds, reading teachers or special ed and regular ed teachers to meet, so it's not when children are there. when I present tonight, I'm going to talk to you, there is a lot of planning and preparation that goes up front to truly get to know your kids and those programs best. So using our PD time on Wednesdays afternoon is really important. So when we have our special education staff with us, where in the past that hasn't always been the case. Sometimes they're pulled out for specialized training, which is important, but the more we can have them to look at our data and to really work with those teachers on teams, it's just really important to have that time too. So again, it's times when kids are gone, but they're getting to do that. So when they're in front of children, they're working with kids, and the collaboration is afterwards. They've already seamlessly planned for that. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Federico?
Just a question, and please tell me, I'm not sure if I'm oversimplifying this or if I'm hearing you correctly. Are we saying that there's a shift from maybe like a general special education teacher, like non-specified, to more specialized reading specialist in special education?
I would say that our special education staff is continually trying to grow their practices, and since we know the impact of literacy, especially in the early grades, they continue to pursue that as a priority. I don't want to say that we're renaming them, because that's not true, but I don't know, Carol, if you wanted to.
So for example, our special education teachers have gone through a lot of training on how to teach students with dyslexia.
Yes.
Or with code reading issues. And then, as an example, we realized it's great that they know that, but it's other folks. We needed to let classroom teachers know the profile of these kids, and reading teachers know the profiles of these kids. So if they're working with a student like this, that they're using the appropriate approach with them. So again, we know we have to cross lines and teach everybody these different things as an example. But our special educators have been going through some very specialized reading instruction training, and they've participated in the LLI training that reading interventionists received as well. So they too have that training.
Okay, so the reading interventionist is not considered a special education, that's regular education?
We call, what we do is we have an umbrella of a reading interventionist, and underneath that falls special education teachers and also certified reading teachers.
Okay.
Because when you think about, okay, this is the intervention that I have planned and can deliver, we say to ourselves, who is the best person most qualified to deliver this intervention? In some cases, it's going to be a reading teacher. In some cases, it's going to be a special education teacher who's serving as a reading interventionist.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mrs. Krasinski?
I may be wrong in this, but what I'm hearing is that most of what has been happening for the last few years has been directed mostly at the elementary level. Is that?
Opportunity one, not to cut you off,
Okay,
my
no.
apologies, but
Yep.
we're really excited to talk to you about opportunity two,
Okay.
which is about the secondary level.
Okay.
So opportunity one really concentrated on elementary.
Okay.
So this is just elementary right now I'm talking to, but
Okay.
you'll see there's a little
All right.
continuum. Really excited about it, actually. Okay.
Mr. Jagosinski?
My understanding that a critical point is the third grade, the reading skills that students have in the third grade.
Yes, sir.
And Milford is been identified by the state as a potential problem area in that. Do we know why that's true, or, this seems to be a significant problem?
So I can speak to that. We've, again, I believe I sent this in a memo also, that we were notified by the state that we were part of a cohort that happens, they take the state districts up and they divide them up into 3 groups. This was Milford 0 to be reviewed from our 2015-16 Smarter Balanced data. Out of the approximately 60 or so districts, we were one of 12 that were initially identified. I've contacted back to the states specifically to say what was the specific reason that we were identified, and they were not inclined to tell us specifically, but the 3 reasons were the number of special ed students that had been identified, the overall achievement score, and then a gap between regular ed students and special ed students. It could be a combination of those, it could be any one of those for identification. As I stated before, the state came in with a small team, met with a team of, I would say about 12 of us from the district, from special educators to reading interventionists to building principals, et cetera. to review our practices. It was a 3-hour meeting. We went through a lengthy survey, and now we're waiting to see what the results of that are. At this point, if we're selected for the next round, it's 6 out of the 12 will be selected for the next round, and we would get some further support, is what we're being told. Could be in the form of outside experts coming in to help us look at all of our practices, including assessment practices, instructional practices, intervention practices, et cetera, but also possibly in the terms of financial support somehow, a grant, I would assume. But I have not, I contacted them, it was last week, to get some details, and they're still coming up with their decision. I believe they said by the end of last week, but I have not heard anything. So, but we are aware that that 3rd grade is the most important year, and that you're going to see some data later that we still continue to have a gap. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit later today.
Does anybody else have any insights into what the situation might be?
If I could chime in, I think there might have been some misunderstanding of what this initial development was. Again, this is part of the state's 3-year improvement plan, and they're in the 3rd year. The 3rd year. So they just randomly select a 1/3 of the districts each year to review.
Right.
And so it was we were one of a 1/3. We were part of the 3rd this time
Right.
around, and we don't know why they selected Milford, but it wasn't punitive. They did not say that we have a big problem here in Milford. They just said, we're going to look at the data of these, 55 districts, and then we selected 12 districts to delve into a little bit more deeply. But we don't really know at this point what it is that led them to Milford.
That's
But
not
it's
what
not
Mr. Bird
punitive.
said.
That is what he said. It's not a punitive issue. It's not like we're in dire need, they're going to come in and take us over.
No, they didn't select 12 random schools to do further study.
It was out of a 1/3. They randomly selected a 1/3 of the schools to look at. And out of the 1/3 that they selected, Milford was one of 12 that they decided to look at more closely.
That they said, these are the 12 schools out of the 55 schools that are most likely to have a problem.
I didn't hear any
So
word,
I do
problem
have
wasn't
one more piece of
mentioned.
information that I was informed of, is that they were looking for a cross-section of districts. In other words, they didn't want to just have all Alliance districts. So they were selecting from different resource groups, from different size. They wanted to ensure that they were looking for a cross-section. So it wasn't as if out of the 60 we were the bottom 12. It was more of they were looking at the full spectrum, and that part of their mandate as part of their federal grant, the ESSA grant, essentially is that they need to provide support to districts. So they're unable to provide support to 60 districts at a time, so they've narrowed it down. The original mandate was try to provide support to 12 districts, and again, it was not to be, they're already providing significant supports to a lot of districts that are identified as Alliance districts, which I'm not sure if you know, you're the lowest 30 in the state in terms of achievement scores. But they wanted to ensure that there was a cross-section of districts that were identified out of these 60. So I don't know if that helps in any way.
I can just let you know about what we did at Orange Avenue with our 3rd grade. Unrelated to this study, but it's still the same 3rd grade that was analyzed that resulted in that, us being identified. So we had a high number of students at Orange Avenue when we reconfigured in 3rd grade who had IEPs, who were special ed. And a lot of them were reading disabled. And so our whole team, so all of our reading specialists and special educators, we did a deep analysis of our 3rd grade regular ed and special ed kids to say what's going on here with this 3rd grade, why so many kids are identified. And what we found is that the kids they had weak phonics and weak fluency. And so we addressed it at Orange Avenue by working with any child who showed a deficit in this area. We added it to their guided reading, word work. If kids had a significant amount of word work deficiencies, then we were doing small group strategy instruction around decoding. If they could decode the words but were disfluent, we were doing fluency groupings with the kids, but it was very, very much one single part of reading that they were weak in. And I wouldn't be surprised if we analyzed all the kids in third grade from that year, if that was a common thread for those children.
Orange Avenue and Pumpkin Delight were named schools of distinction because they were in the top 10% in improvement, both in overall students and special ed students. Did the same thing happen at Pumpkin Delight? Or one of the things I was wondering is what did we do at Orange Avenue and Pumpkin Delight that led to this improvement in performance?
That's really hard for me to know that piece, but I can tell you that at Orange Ave, what we did was we got down to the bottom of figuring out what is the deficit area with the kids, and then had very targeted intervention. And then taught the classroom teachers how to handle this weakness area in the classroom. And it was new learning for them, much to my surprise, but it was new learning for them. And they took off with it, of course. So I don't know if that's a piece of it, but I do know that when we looked deeply at that third grade cohort, which was concerning to me just within my building, that's what we found as a trend across the children.
So if I may as well, you can see the last point up here is ensure common intervention practices. If we have things that are working well in certain buildings, we want to ensure that we're sharing best practices across all buildings. Tonight we're talking about the recently perhaps parallel work between special ed and regular ed. We want to ensure that we're not seeing parallel work between buildings, that we're getting together, we're discussing these things, we're sharing best practices to celebrate the success of two of our buildings, but then say what can be replicated in other buildings. Each building is unique, each staff is unique, the students are unique, but there's elements that we can get together and say, here's this deficit, if you will, in this specific skill, here's what's worked with some of these students in our building, try this in here. So I know that we do that through the reading coaches as well as special educators, that they get together and they collaborate and say, this is what's working. So that's a great point, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Federico?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just one question on the selection. So we don't know why we were selected. We know it's possible that it could have been these three regions, or these three criteria. So I'm just wondering, I mean, does it sound like it's possible that we could have been in the middle of those 60 and the state said we want to work with somebody who's in the middle?
So because we got the feedback, we want more information, so I really called and tried, and it was, and I kept getting, it's one of those three or more of those reasons, and that's pretty much it. And and on the phone, the gentleman said to me, you really shouldn't focus in on the selection, but think about the possibilities of how this could be helpful to you. And in some cases, what he said was other districts should be jealous that you're not getting the supports. And again, we may not get to the next round because they no longer can fund 12 districts, they can only fund 6. So there's yet another round. And one of the things they said to us when we had our meeting is, did we seem as a district to be on the same page? Which may actually kick us out of it, because if we have our act together, like we know where we're going, that we might not be selected, that they're looking for districts that perhaps are not as communicative, collaborative, et cetera. So that was hinted. I wouldn't say it was directly said to me. I don't know if you inferred that as well, Carol. Yeah.
All right. Good
I
to
do
know.
remember
Thank you.
your explanation from meeting to meeting. If you throw in some puppies in there.
Oh, yes.
Everybody loves a puppy.
I didn't include them today.
Okay, opportunity one. Okay, fantastic. At this time, I'd like to invite my colleague, Lisa Swanson, to join me to discuss opportunity two. Lisa, as you know, is the instructional supervisor for mathematics for Milford Public Schools. And we'd like to talk to you a little bit further about some of the work that we did to help out with an opportunity.
So you've been hearing a lot about Opportunity One, and yeah, it was really about elementary reading specifically. But however, Opportunity Two was really to focus in on developing and implementing a clear and consistent vision for raising our achievement at the secondary level in both ELA and mathematics. So That was what was presented to us, and under that, there were really 4 big bullet points. Some of these really are, you're gonna kind of feel a theme here because it's gonna sound like we're gonna hear about that a little bit. So clarifying the role of what regular ed and special ed and ELA and math content specifically. Providing opportunities within the school day for all our students who struggle to receive extra time on task in both ELA and mathematics. And Jen's going to get the slides. And then strengthen our instruction for struggling students by shifting to really content-strong teachers as the primary resource for supporting students who struggle. You've kind of heard a little bit about that from Carol, about how we really make sure that regular education is the lead. We own all students in regular education. And how we use data to ensure that those supports are delivered, are effective in increasing our student learning.
So one thing that Lisa and I can both speak to is that we have dug deeper into our NWEA benchmark assessment data, really becoming fluent with what the data is telling us and how to use it to best target instruction with our core classroom teachers. We also have grown in our implementation assessments. For example, now with the BAS in place, the Benchmark Assessment Systems, I found this in Pinnell. We have that in place and eligible for all kids in K-8. So that's a reading assessment that can follow kids all the way up until they're ready to move on into the high school world, giving us a similar track of information on them. So we're using the same language to talk about reading and what kids need within their reading skills.
And while I would love to say that mathematics has a BAS version, but unfortunately, we don't. When a lot of research came around SRBI, the reality is the amount of research into the needs of struggling math students, there just isn't really a tremendous amount of research. When I came to this role 6 years ago, it was really frustrating because everywhere I turned, I found research around struggling readers. So there is no really, NWA is our benchmark assessment that tells us a lot. We focus on fluency in mathematics K-8. So we've designed our own benchmarks that are specifically related to the Common Core standards around fluency, knowing that the research out there does say that if students don't own fluency, they're going to continue to struggle, especially when it comes to applying mathematics in critical thinking situations. If their brain power is occupied by figuring out how to add 2-digit numbers, they're unable to focus on the critical thinking skills around what is this problem asking me? Is it about tax? Is it about just adding up 2 things? They'll get lost in all of that if they're consumed by, I can't remember, do I carry the one, all those bad practices that we were all taught as we grew up, that we now know better about. So while there's research around how students learn math, there isn't a ton of research around struggling learners, but the research that we can find tells us that you have to have those foundational skills. So we start in kindergarten with screening kids. Can they count? Can they identify numbers? These are fundamentals that we start off right in the beginning. We screen all our students too, giving them some assessments around timed assessments around your basic math facts, all the way up to equation work in the middle school. So if that can kind of give you a picture of our vast assessment system.
So at the high school level, we have also implemented, with the support of the board, the academic centers, where kids are able to go and get help from either a math or an ELA teacher. And we also have extended periods of time. You're going to hear from 2 brilliant teachers this evening. We're going to talk to you a little bit about the art of teaching within the extended block at the high school for students who are struggling with reading comprehension. They have some extra time to spend working not only on the curriculum, but also on skills necessary to make them more proficient readers. So we spent,
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yes, ma'am.
So Lisa, would you talk a little bit about what are the changes that have been made in mathematics in the middle and the high school around special education students?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So I would say one of the big changes was really when we, part of my role has also been to look at what are we using to support our struggling math students. And if we use investigations, which is a concept-based math program, then when we're intervening with students, we can't use something else that has a different language that we speak around mathematics, that all our special education teachers have our resource that we use in our regular education classes, that is, they have a set that they use for their own learning. We help them go through and figure out what are the strongest of the strategies that, so you want students to be flexible, but we also know that our learners who have cognitive disabilities, they don't need to have 5 strategies, they need to own a strategy. So we have, through the classroom teachers' work, along with the special education teachers' work, have created resources that'll focus on the strategies that are most effective to move our students along in their efficiency. So first, I might want you to own 5 strategies, but I'm actually going to ask you to only own 2 strategies, that you can show it to me 2 different ways. And I might actually only want you to tell me about 1 strategy that we're going to really work on, instead of overwhelming a child with all the strategies. If that helps speak to
And in the
what
middle
you're
and the high school?
So in the middle and the high school, really our classroom teachers are really our interventionists, and in our high school we have special ed teachers that are team teaching with our math students as well in our middle school. So I didn't say that right. So in middle school and high school, a lot of our support is done within that regular education setting where we have team teaching going on with regular education and special education teachers in the same room working together with students, so that they're using the same approaches. Again, that language that you speak when you're talking. So if somebody has an old frame, for example, I just used one with you of carrying numbers. We don't carry anything around in our pockets. We don't carry digits. We regroup numbers. So something like that, simple language right there. If you haven't been recently educated in how we instruct mathematics, and you're using terms like carrying around for kids, and then the teacher's talking about regrouping, think about that with a student who's already got struggles. So we really are doing that together in the classroom and making sure that everybody is really speaking that same language, using those same strategies.
And the double block, or the extra time?
Yes. Okay, so you're right, you see, you remember all those things I passed down there. So we, in our high schools, everybody walks in taking algebra. That's part of the Common Core shifts. And knowing that some students, and what this report will tell you, that students who struggle need more time, we designed an Algebra 1 curriculum that has additional blocks in it. So we meet 4 periods a week out of the 6-day schedule at the high school, and these students are being met 6 times in that week. So they're at time and a half, and that we have that in both ELA and mathematics, so that they're still getting Algebra 1, but we're honoring the fact that they're going to need some intervention work, some additional time on skills, whatever presents in that unit of study, that those teachers are allowed to honor that time specifically for our students. And in 6th grade right now, we have also an additional block of time that is really this year, it was new to us last year, and this year we're really continuing to hone what that additional intervention time would look like. That's built in regular into their schedule, which everybody's getting that extra time, but really that time is about really figuring out who needs what. So kids who need intervention, kids who just need to steady the course, and kids who have an opportunity for extension, and working on how you work that in a workshop model.
So within the intervention model redesign, as Lisa just started to explain a little bit in math, we really said we're going to start with core classroom teachers working in collaboration with reading teachers and with special education teachers. So helping build the capacity of our core teachers to deliver strategy-based, focused small groups has been something that we've been working on quite a bit. We've also revised the SAT process, and we'll continue to review and continue to look for areas that we can improve. Lisa and I have both been engaged in significant work around our curriculum, and also within that curriculum, identifying our instructional approach of how we are teaching the curriculum. For example, we've shifted from teaching whole class, whole book, everybody reading the same book at the same time, to we do have an anchor text that kids may refer to, but we also have choice literature from either independent reading or also book club books. So when we talk about that through line between the workshop model of elementary to middle school, we're keeping kids engaged in books that are highly motivating, and also books that are right for them to be able to continue to build that stamina as a reader.
So in math, we don't really have different level books, but we have different tools that you can bring to the table. So if a student is at the concrete learning level, then we need to have some concrete tools for them. If they're able to understand representational level, which would mean maybe they can draw a picture, then we're gonna let them do that. And if they're completely abstract and they're working in just number world without any other tool with them, so we don't have text, but we have really tools that we can provide kids. Do they need a hundreds chart? Do they need a tens frame? You know, do they need for equations, for a balance, basically, where you have representations of variables and numbers on that balance? You know, it's really more about what you give them as a tool to help access that and demonstrate their learning than just, unfortunately, it's just not that easy to give them another text. You couldn't do it.
But that's where you count on your special education colleagues as well, because they are masters of modifying and adapting in order to meet the needs of kids based on what they need.
And last year, we worked with a professor from Quinnipiac University that came and worked specifically with the teachers who are working in those team teaching classes to really work on building our understanding of what is a concrete representation when we're talking about adding and subtracting fractions, multiplying, dividing, solving equations last year specifically to our middle school population, really working to grow our special education teachers, also knowledge of that. That's a lot of new learning and a lot of new research around math instruction, so.
We continue to work with data to set goals for students, but even beyond that, as students get older, we need to look further into the future and think about college and career readiness. So how are we looking at not only what kids are able to do now, but what are the skills that we are going to want them to be able to show us independently so that they can be ready to enter either the workforce or to move on and to attend college. So some of our next steps, we continue to think about scheduling and we continue to think about how we can provide extra time within class time. How can we build some small group work that can be even further targeted, but also if and when necessary, we can build additional time in, as we have with the team taught model at the middle school for ELA, and also the co-teaching model and the team taught model for math and ELA at the high school. We continue to strengthen the tie between core classroom instruction and also the high school academic centers. The more in line we are with our curriculum and instructional delivery, the better that those folks can help assist students, because it's pretty clear that we're all working again towards those same proficiencies where we want kids to be independent.
And those high school academic centers have there are teachers. They were teachers who were teaching 5 preps. You know, their prep is that academic learning center. They are very strong instructors. One of them, as a matter of fact, is an AP calculus teacher. I mean, he knows everything mathematically speaking to really be able to bring that down in those support centers. So this is, in a lot of school systems, when they talk about an academic support center at the high school, it's generally a tutor model, I guess. This is really, you know, our certified math teachers in that room working with our kids who need support.
Last but not least, again, continuing to grow in our efficiencies and analyzing data and be able to use the various data that we have in order to set reasonable and meaningful goals for students around interventions both within classroom instruction and then above and beyond classroom instruction as necessary. So we're communicating using the same language around what we want kids to know, understand, and be able to do. Questions, yes.
Dr. Gregory.
Could you speak to, maybe it's an unfortunate word choice, or maybe the last one, reinstitute district and building level data teams? Did they cease to exist?
So we did a lot of work did they cease to exist? I would say no, but the formal process behind that, I think we may have loosened up a little. We spent a lot of time for a while on the very technical aspects of that, and over time, I think, you know, that you get a little further away from that definition almost every single year, so it's really coming back to what is really that defined purpose, what does an efficient cycle look like, and kind of coming back and, you know, tightening back up again. We kind of loosened up, and we're finding that it isn't quite where it used to be. So time to kind of come back and revisit that model.
Okay.
Other DeGrego?
questions? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In 2000, I was a 9th grade special ed math teacher, and I remember we used to go into a math teacher's classroom before inclusion, and I used to work one-on-one, and there was about 5 teachers with me, all working one-on-one to make sure everybody was up to date. For the whole day, I was assigned 1 student. Do we have something, do you do something similar to that if somebody's not catching up? Or you do that? I don't know.
You know, I can speak to what I observe in the regular education setting. So, for example, in that algebra class that I was talking to you about that's supporting, I walk into a class, it's got probably 12 to 15 students in it, and really, I know who's who. Right, because I know who the special education teacher is, but really,
Well,
I think to somebody who doesn't know those personalities standing in that room, they wouldn't be able to tell who the regular ed teacher is and the special ed teacher is, because they're both really working side by side with students, providing opportunities. They learn from each other as they move along. So the special education teacher has something that they know about, an organizer that students use for something, so now now we use that with everybody, because it's good not only for our special needs students, but it's also good, it's a good learning tool. So I would say that, to me, you would walk in and you really wouldn't know who's who in that co-teaching room, who's the special education teacher and who the regular education teacher, if you didn't know.
I meant the special
Okay.
ed student that couldn't keep up.
Does that still happen?
Yes, that's what I was wondering. Do you
Yeah.
have one-on-one with that student?
I think it's more about, we group them more about who, if it's one-on-one because there's no other student who needs that, then that's how it would look. But I think we try to be efficient with, we've got a group of students and this is their needs. So, how can we help build their schedules and so that we can support that with 1 teacher maybe to 4 students who have very similar needs. I think we spend more time around that idea, so that, but if it had to be one-on-one because that was the only child or that was the way it worked, that would happen, yes.
We wouldn't have a math teacher working all day long with a single student.
Yeah.
No, we
would not do that.
No.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Did you have one? Ms. Federico?
Oh, sorry, no, I'm stretching.
All right, thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Thank you very much.
This is a pleasure, thank you.
At this point, I believe I will turn this over to my colleague, Mrs. Courier.
Thank you.
Speak a little bit further about bringing this to the building level and some case studies where we've been processing this work.
Okay, good evening, and thank you for having me here tonight. I think what's most exciting about speaking about the work tonight is that, while I enjoy being the leader of some of this work, it's really the teachers, special ed teachers, regular ed teachers, the speech and language pathologists, psychologists that have really helped to make this really come to fruition for our students. What I put up here on the board this evening, I just have 2 quick slides, but I'm going to illuminate it with some stories for you. I have the gift of the gab, I'm Italian, so we're going to give you a little bit more than what's up here. Really, when we're planning for our students, what we go through is a process of thinking of 2 questions. How can we best meet the needs of our students, and who's best suited to give that instruction? You've heard this evening a little bit about blurring the lines of those titles of what do we teach. So I'm not just a reading teacher, I'm not the special ed teacher, I'm not the classroom teacher, but how do you kind of blur those to say who has the area of expertise that really is going to help to best support what our students need? As you've heard Dr. Fieser talk a little bit this evening, you heard her talk about that hugging of our students. So this is my student. And I've been in a number of districts. This is not a unique situation that we hug our students tightly. But what it is really that release. Do we trust each other enough? Do we have that collective efficacy here within our school to say, if I share this responsibility with someone else, that our students are going to get the best? Within my 5 years in Milford, I've been a really proud participant to start to see a lot of this flourish and grow. And what I want to do for you tonight is illuminate some of the examples that I've seen as an elementary principal about how this looks and how, with the collaboration amongst different groups of people, we've helped to best put the student in the front of what we're doing for our kiddos. Okay. I'm going to put these all up for you, because then I don't have to fight with the technology. So what I really want to focus on is, what have we done at Mathewson that's helped make this work? As I've talked about earlier today, and you had a great question about where does this time come to collaborate, planning and preparation is at the forefront to really make sure that our students' needs are met. This comes in a variety of ways. We really try to do it all behind the scenes, but there's nothing more important than having teachers work collaboratively within the classroom together to really both share their lenses at how the students are doing. We used to have models where you would just have a pull-out model of service delivery. So if the student needed to go for service, they might have a smaller group outside of the classroom. Although that's not typically 100% of the time, that is a model that is needed still, and sometimes works best depending on what the classroom setting is or what the foundational skills are that the students need. What we found, though, is that with the inclusion of the workshop model, so really where the teachers provide a mini lesson, and then have that independent work time or small group time and a sharing back out at the end, what we found is that doing this in reading, in math, in writing, it was so beneficial to keep students in the classroom as much as possible so that they're not missing something. The conversation a peer might have, the question that the teacher provides for that mid-lesson teaching point, those are critical teaching points that help students develop their independence, and if they're always out of the classroom for that, they could be missing key pieces. So what we've really established over time at Mathewson is this collaborative model, where our special ed teachers really take a look at the students coming into the grade levels for the year. How do we group these students into classrooms? And how do we have a special ed teacher work with a classroom teacher the most they can to really be a team and go through the team approach in working with students. So while they're in the classroom together, they are watching and learning from each other. And you've heard a lot this evening about learning as we go. Special education teachers, while they have a level of expertise in their field, often also felt worried as we had all this new curriculum that came into our district, right? New standards and new things to learn. They're also very much learning from being in with the classroom teachers. So you had this knowledge base, this sharing base that really helped the student. They no longer were leaving the classroom and the teachers had to catch up with one another as to what's next or read books and find out together. Now they're really watching and learning and being able to pick up from each other right away. The other piece that I really wanted to talk about was how this affects parents and family members that come to our school. We talk a lot about being transparent, and parents and families are very much a part of our learning process. It pleases me so much to be able to sit into PPTs or 504 meetings, or even to have parent-teacher conferences where you have the special education teacher and regular education teacher sharing the ownership with this student, being able to both know in the classroom and if they are pulled out, what they're working on. It's no longer, okay, now I'm going to turn you over to Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so so they can tell you about math or about reading. It was a very disconnected model as a parent to say, well, why don't you know it, my child as a learner? And so when we're talking about developing independent learners that get the best out of everything, you want cohesion amongst your teachers and amongst your staff. And that's really what working in this collaborative model provides. I want you to think about it as writing a story. You can write a beginning, you can write about a character, you can write an ending, and you can keep editing and editing and editing it until you're blue in the face. And it might be perfect. But until all the pieces come together, it doesn't make the full story. That's a lot about the instruction of how we work with kids. We can work independently in our own rooms, but it takes the village approach to truly show how do we make goals and objectives that are going to help move students that have IEPs to get to that level of independence so that they can build this when they're in the classroom setting or when they are in for different services. This also very much encapsulates our reading teachers. A few years ago, we had a number of children that some of our reading programs and interventions were just not reaching to the depth of where they needed to go. It was missing pieces. I mean, reading, I don't want to discourage math, but reading is very comprehensive. Is it phonics? Is it your phonemic awareness? Are you looking at fluency, comprehension? How are we tying all pieces together? We actually had a group of a special education teacher, a speech and language pathologist, and a reading teacher work together to create a triad that had a number of students cycle through during the reading instruction. Now this, of course, is in conjunction with the classroom teacher. Some of them didn't need to go to the speech pathologist, but within this group of really 4 people, if you included the classroom teacher, we were able to make a unique and dynamic way to teach reading to best meet the needs of kids with the lenses through a variety of expertise. That's something that obviously can't happen every year, But depending on when you have your professionals working together to understand students, you're able to be creative to say, I'm not going to provide this program. I'm going to provide this intervention that's best needed for kids, and we're going to work together to do this. I also want to say that we started talking a little bit about the social emotional pieces, and not to go too far, but social workers also push into classrooms very much. They provide their social skills curriculum within classrooms. They buddy with classroom teachers to make cycles and really provide curriculum that meets the needs of a variety of students. So while we're focusing, I know, on the academic piece tonight, our sphere of really collaboration together is a huge thing that helps the students of Milford benefit. And as I said, does it take a lot of behind the scenes? Absolutely. But being able to see examples through the year of when we have cohorts of students, that a program is not going to do it for them. We need to be creative in meeting their needs to create goals that's specific to their needs to move them forward. I've been able to see that and been on the forefront, and I'm very proud to have had staff that's been able to rise to those occasions. Just to answer also, when we look at our third grade reading, reading is very transformational from K to 2 and 3 to 5. Everywhere along the road, you get to gain different skills and development. We want our students by third grade to have all those building blocks they need, and so a lot of times our teams will focus a lot on those early intervention grades so that we can make sure they have the skills they need to get over that comprehension hump, which comes a little sooner. So, to highlight some of the things that I've shared, really that shared understanding that those kids are all of our kids, and the more opportunities that I found that staff have been able to work together to really say, it's not about what my role is or what this program is, but what does this child need, and how are we best able to support them. We've really been able to see some success stories, and success looks like students being able to master, if they have an IEP, some of their goals, to be able to challenge each other, to be able to see raises in academics. But you can't forget the confidence piece and the transparency piece, that those families also know that the professionals in front of their children for 6.5 hours a day truly understand their child and what they need to be successful. It's a huge piece that can't be overlooked either. So those are just some of the more general ed but special ed combination things together. I know that I have Dr. Dudley here, who's a colleague of mine, that's going to also talk about how this looks within our SAT programs. Any questions for me, or can we turn over to Dr. Dudley and take questions after that? Okay, Dr. Dudley, you're up. You got it. Sit. Okay, you're welcome.
Good evening, my name is Cliff Dudley, I'm principal over at Orchard Hills. I want to talk to you a little bit again tonight about the linkage, the collaboration, the cooperation between special ed and regular ed. That idea that you've heard many times tonight, that we own all our kids. No child goes over there because that's where they belong. They belong in our Milford schools. And so, like, looking at this answers a little bit of some questions that have popped up. The thing is about students bringing the data, the students' history. What do we know about the students? Where we want them to be? We say at our school, when we do our school continuous improvement plan, our SKIP plan, we have an overriding question. And the question is really 3 parts. It says, where are the students? Where do you want them to be? How are you getting them there? And so I don't want to say we don't want to hear what you have to think. We want to hear what you know. And this is how we do it. By looking at the student's history, the instruction that they need, the goals you want to get them to, the data that the student has. Someone asked a question about data teams before. This is kind of like the old data teams. What does the data say about the students? How do you use it? And to monitor the progress, I just say, how do you know the student is progressing? You don't just say, oh yeah, I think he's doing this, or I think he's going to get better. Well, he'll get better. You don't want to hear any of that. This is what's happening to the student. This is what we put into place. This isn't working. Let's try this instead. This is working. Let's continue it. And the timeline on that. Not, he'll get better. No, he's going to get to a certain goal within a certain time period. The other thing that's very important is the SAT. That's the Student Assistance Team. Every school has them, and it's a strong linkage, again, between the special ed and the regular ed. And the goal is to get the students the support they need to function within a regular ed classroom, to make them independent. And as a matter of fact, even the makeup of the special ed team, we have regular teachers, regular education teachers, and special ed teachers on it. They all give input, and the classroom teacher comes and gives input as well. And just for example, in special ed at my school, one of the members of the team, my school psychologist, Mrs. Storrs, is here tonight. And two of our coordinators, who are classroom teachers, are also here tonight. Ms. Frank handles the K through 2, and Ms. Borakomsky handles the 3 through 5. Excuse me, the 3 through 5. And it's a team effort, again, to move the students along with the supports they need. Give you a little more information about that. I'd like to introduce my teacher leader, Mrs. Dixon. She's going to talk a little more.
Good evening, everyone. I'll be very brief, but I did want to share some illustration about our student assistance team, which is a regular education initiative. So they develop targeted instruction to meet the needs of individual learners. When a student isn't making sufficient progress in a regular education intervention, that teacher will present that student to the SAT team. SAT will then invite different team members to be part of our student assistance team based on the weaknesses of the student. So for instance, if it is a reading fluency weakness that the student is presenting, we would invite the reading specialist to be part of that team, or the literacy coach. We would also invite a special educator to be part of that team. And then we will use research-based strategies. We'll develop some targeted instruction for that student. The teacher will monitor the student's growth. We will review regularly how the student is progressing through data collection and observation. And because it is a shared responsibility, we invite different domains and different professionals to be part of that team. Every team is different. If it's a behavior issue, we might have Mrs. Storrs come in, or the social worker. So it depends. It's very targeted. If we find that the student is not progressing, we will collaborate even more with PBS to take further steps. But I will say that due to the collaboration between regular education teachers and special education teachers, that the majority of our SAT student interventions are successful. And this leads to student independence, and ultimately, a good majority of our students are exited from the SAT process. So it is a great way to reach the needs of all of our learners. Did I miss anything, girls? Thank you.
Oh, sure. Can I ask a quick question?
Yes,
So
of course.
the SAT process could relate to either a regular ed or a special ed student, correct?
Yes, and the primary purpose is to provide the supports the child may need to stay in the regular education. Yes. The ultimate goal is that we will provide services for a specific amount of time, review how those services worked, and hopefully we wean the child off of these supports so that he can function. One of the things we had up here somewhere was independently.
Okay, thank you.
It's a very fluid process, so, you know, they could be exited, then they perhaps will be entered for another area of weakness, but this year alone, we exited 6 students already from SAT. We have about 13 out of 350 students, so it's working.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce 2 of our high school teachers who are here tonight, Mrs. Laura O'Keefe and Ms. Maggie Condon, who are going to speak to you about some of the best practices that they are working on at Warren High.
So I'm Megan Condon and this is Lauren O'Keefe, and we teach the extended English 1 Level 3 class at Foreign. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Reader's Workshop model that was mentioned previously. We have an extended model, so it's a time and a half, and Laura will speak more to that. But because we have that little bit of extra time, especially with these Level 3 kind of struggling readers, we have the time to allow them to read their choice books as well as continuing with our core texts. So we've been reading To Kill a Mockingbird as a class and going through various skills of reading for information and text evidence and kind of annotating and understanding themes. And then those students are able to take those skills and work at them with text at their own level. So we have students reading books, like I think we had one student choose a book in September that was like over 300 pages long, and it took him a while to get through it, but he read the whole thing. And in that time, he read one book where we had another student who had read like 2 or 3. So it really allowed them the freedom to read something of high interest and develop those skills and kind of foster that love and enjoyment of reading that sometimes gets lost for our struggling readers as they move up. And if you can see on the photo behind us, during our kind of independent reading time, we take a few times a week, 2, 3, sometimes more depending on the schedule, a chunk of time, 15, 20 minutes to really give them to sit down and read. And we have a couple of different avenues that they can read it, whether it be at a desk or for some of our more fidgety needing to move around, we have larger exercise balls that they kind of just sit on, and it gives them that ability to kind of move around a little bit but still focused in on their reading. And when they do read, they track the number of pages they get through, and they can kind of see as the year's gone on, the more pages they're able to read in the same time frame, and kind of improving on that and copying down what they've read and what they're understanding, while still kind of staying with the curriculum and the core writing and reading, and having 2 English, I'm an English core teacher and Lauren is an English and reading specialist. So having us both there when it comes to reading and writing is extremely beneficial for the student, because we can both hone in on different areas of need and help them no matter where they turn.
Thank you. Lauren O'Keefe, as Megan said. This is my 7th year at Foreign, and we've tried this model of working in a couple different ways. When I first started, the same students walked from an English class down the hall down to my reading class. It was 2 different teachers. The schedule didn't allow for very much collaboration between us, and it was difficult. So there were things going along in parallel, and sometimes we would get a chance to meet, but it wasn't very coordinated. I've had the opportunity over the past couple of years to co-teach with some special education teachers as well, and now I'm co-teaching with Megan, where we're both content teachers. And while both models have advantages, it is very nice to have 2 people who really understand the content. That's not to say we don't work with our special ed colleagues, we do. We reach out to them, we continue to work in collaboration, not just, in terms of PPT, IEP meetings, but in best practices, what works. We're, having this concern about this student, how can you help us address it? It lets us, integrate. Again, somebody had mentioned before, you would walk in and you wouldn't know who's a special ed and who's a regular ed kid in our class. The kids don't know. It's not something we announce and we say all the kids are going to go over here and all these kids are going to go over here. It's very integrated. We work in different groups in different ways to best meet the needs of all of our learners in the classroom. And we've been seeing success with using the Readers and Writers Workshop model. We have students who are able to really use our extended time with them in the most valuable way. We do see them for time and a half. So out of a 6-day cycle, we see them 5 out of the 6 days. 3 of the days, we see them kind of what would be like a normal amount of time, but then we get an extra one of the 88-minute blocks, and then we have one of the days where we see them a double. So we see them 2 periods in a row. So we can really focus our instruction. That extra time, not only allows us to do some different things, but not to rush the students, to be able to give them the time they need to learn what they need. So I want to thank you for your time.
Questions for them? Mr. DeGrego?
Yeah, Ms. O'Keefe, I can relate to that because I remember in 2003, first time I taught in an inclusion class, and I was just about to take attendance. And the English teacher, I was teaching cried the beloved. The English teacher ran over and said, Mike, we don't take attendance here because we don't distinguish between special ed. Because I was a special ed teacher for that class. And, you don't, I didn't know you didn't do it. It was my first time with inclusion.
We're all learning, and a lot of some of our students who aren't identified as special ed have the same needs as our regular ed students. So it's looking at what the students need, not what their labels are or aren't.
Thank you.
So now we'll move on to opportunity 4. Okay, so to the board, you received this, which I wanted to provide with you ahead of time because it was a lot of numbers that would not display well. But I'll reference this a little bit as I move forward. So opportunity 4 was focused on more efficiently managing the deployment of therapeutic services, psychologists, and social workers. And this was put forward by DMC as the final recommendation. And specifically what they gave as a first task was to collect and analyze data on the functions, schedules, roles, and responsibilities of staff members. So I can tell you that 8 months into this position, that is what I have been doing a lot of. I know I spoke to you at the budget meeting about the different things that I've been engaged in surrounding learning about all these different roles and responsibilities. So just for example, DMC made some very specific recommendations about caseloads. And I also, in addition to heeding that advice, I also have reached out to many surrounding towns here, local districts, and learned from them, for example, what their local practices are, and does that compare to DMC recommendations, just so I have a balance point to say, is this typical? So I've been engaging in that, and then I've also, in addition to this analysis, been doing all the reading and learning I can. So I've engaged in a lot of professional development this year and have been doing as much reading as I can on what are the best practices in special education, not just, education, but special education. So I'll speak to that.
You said you reached out to the other towns to see if the DMC model tracks to what did it.
Comparative-wise, no.
Okay.
No, it was more in line with where we are, with some discrepancies. We have more higher caseloads in some areas and lowers in others. There was no direct pattern, but we're definitely ballpark. But I still want to do some more research around that because some of the districts are very different than ours.
Right.
So I wanted to look for some.
Just a sample, what towns do you reach out to?
Stratford, Hamden, East Haven, West Haven. What were some other ones? We did like some Westports, people that we were connected with, and of course I don't think we would do a comparison with Westport and think that would be similar, but those were a few. There's more. Wilton, I can't remember, but
okay.
Shelton. I haven't, but I certainly can reach out there. Ansonia I reached out to, haven't heard back from them, but I'll continue to do that because it's been helpful for me to see. And I've learned how some service delivery models are different than ours that might be more efficient or might meet the needs of kids in a different way than we've thought of. So I'll continue on that work as well. So anyways, in addition to the caseloads that I mentioned, also I wanted to talk about best practices. So one of the, I actually do a lot of reading of DMC's, or now DMG's publications because they seem to stay pretty current and release a lot of information about best practices in special education. So they have emphasized in a lot of their more recent publications the social emotional learning aspect or needs within districts and the need for behaviorists. They have a really high recommendation for that, which it would be crippling. It's not something we could do. But when I think of some of their recommendations, I also think of the skill level of our social workers and what they're able to do that a behaviorist could do, not to the level of a behaviorist, but the training that we've done with our school psychs and our social workers and our teachers of special programs around behavioral planning and behavioral support is pretty impressive, and our social workers do a great job at that. So when I see that recommendation, I don't think, oh no, we have to go there. I think we have some pretty good supports in that arena as well. And around the social emotional learning, that's an area that we've partnered again with one of the instructional supervisors, Annalise Vaziano. I believe you'll hear from her shortly about her work. But we know we need to work very closely in conjunction with her to help strengthen the core, but then also align our tier 2 and our more intensive special ed interventions with what's going on in the core that'll be coming up and be strengthened across time. So there's alignment there. So again, a big partnership growing, and then also a huge need in supporting the social emotional learning of all kids. So I've been doing a lot of learning about that. Also, I know from the DMC audit and also best practices that extra time on a subject that was spoken about is so important. And we do have those structures in place in areas of our continuum of service. So we have intervention blocks that allow for that in K-3, in different levels at the middle school and at the high school, but we need to grow that across all levels. So that's an area of focus. We've definitely been increasing that, but we have to figure out how to do it at all levels. And then I would also say another best practice speaks to what you were talking about a little bit around the one-on-one support. So we've been doing a lot of learning about how, there's a mindset that one-on-one is the Cadillac of special education. And if you've achieved that, you've gotten the Cadillac. And we know so much better now that cooperative learning and collaborative learning for kids is so much more motivating. They learn not only from the teacher, but they learn from their peers. It's a much stronger model. And so we're in the process of shifting that mindset across staff members and across all the stakeholders that surround a student, including families, because that was a long-standing mindset. So that's a big shift too. So that's something we're working on as well.
So can you give an example of that? This is with, like, what would it look like with the direction we're heading in?
So in some areas with students, they'll be receiving one-on-one instruction in reading with a special educator or a reading interventionist. And it might, the push for that might be from the educator that says, you know what, they're very distractible and I can hold their attention better if I work with them one-on-one. But even still, or the drive might come from the parent who feels that, I really think my child gets more when they're one-on-one with a grown-up because they have their undivided attention. But we know so much better now that kids just learn better when they're with other children. It's much more interactive. When you get in a one-on-one situation, it's very adult-driven and adult-directed, and the kids are far more passive, and that's not something that we want for kids. That's not saying there are not times when one-on-one is appropriate for pre-teaching or for specific skill teaching, or there's all different configurations that make sense for kids, but we have to shift that mindset of, one-on-one is the best, because it certainly is not. So, is that okay? So anyways, if we take a look here, one of the other things that has been important to my work is to really begin to grasp all of the mandates that honestly seem to rain down upon us. Just this last week, there's 2 new mandates that we talked about on Monday morning that, have given us pause. So the changing mandates can have such an impact on the role of the very people that DMC is talking about here. So I don't know if you were able to see on that chart the different recent mandates that came out in the last few years that have changed dramatically the actions and activities that our school psychologists, for example, have to take part in. So, familiar with that? Okay. And then clarifications of laws and the impact on staffing. So some existing laws we've received dear colleague letters on this year since I've been here that have had a huge impact or will have a huge impact on the roles and responsibilities of our staff, putting more responsibility on the current staff that we have. And then also, I would say that we have that changing demographic of students that I talked to you about when we were focused on the budget. But we actually have 2 demographic changes. So we have the social emotional learning that's having a huge impact on our students across grade levels, starting at 3 years old and going all the way up. And in addition to that, while we have, our numbers are declining in special education, but what's decreasing is the number of kids who have learning disabilities and language impairments. But what's increasing is the number of students that we have who have autism, or students who might be medically fragile and have a complexity of disabilities. And they require far more services than a learning disabled child, for example, or a speech or language impaired student. So for example, a student who is language impaired might receive an hour a week of language intervention or language therapy a week, whereas a student with autism might receive that daily or even more than that daily, as opposed to twice a week. So you can see that even though the numbers are declining, those couple of disabilities that are very complex, they can give you, the dropping numbers can give you a false sense of, why are your staff numbers not dropping to the degree that we would expect, and that is a very real consideration for sure. And what I would say very much about next steps for opportunity for, my goal is always going to be to meet the academic, social, behavioral needs of all students while realizing efficiencies. So I don't know if you were able to see on the staff list that we have decreased staff over the last 3 years. You could see with our programs that our programs, some have reduced, but some have risen, and some have almost doubled. And again, that's being responsive to the profiles of students who are coming forward to us. And then around realizing efficiencies, I feel as though every time we're able to lessen a responsibility in one area, we always have to be thinking about how are we going to strengthen other areas. So while I'm sure over time, we will see reductions, hopefully with a very strong core and SAT process that results in less kids being identified as special ed, probably under the learning disability category. That would be one way where we'll be seeing our numbers drop. And then what I would like to see is that we also have declining enrollment, which is a very real thing. But I just lost my whole point. Something about efficiencies.
How about bringing students back into the district?
Yes, sorry. So that as we're strengthening those programs, we already are able to target with the strengthening we're gonna do for next year, we've already identified several outplaced students who we're gonna be bringing back as a result of that. So it's win-win because I think everybody wants their kids home in their home district, so I think it works for parents, I think it works for kids. It certainly is something that we want to see more of, and it's cost-effective to boot, which is win-win, so. The other thing that I want to do more of, I did this a little bit last summer when I first came in. I took a look at the exiting data, and we have a little bit of a surge of exit at the early elementary level with our kids who have articulation issues. So kids who may have a lisp or some sort of sound issue, and they are typically exited from special education services. There was a high number of those exits, and then a lot of our exits were surrounding graduation. And then I couldn't find a pattern really. And so I know that I want to see that between strengthening the core, strengthening our SAT process, and intervening really early in preventing special education identification, that we're also really successful at intervening with specialized instruction with some of the disability areas where you can actually fill in the gaps and anticipate exiting a student from special education. That is definitely what our goal is whenever we go down that road with kids, is that we want them to be as independent as possible, and if possible, return to general education for sure. And again, continue to strengthen specialized instruction and delivery models to close the gap. I mean, that's just going to be our continuous work in partnership with regular education for sure. So any questions on this particular area?
Yep.
Mr. Jaganski?
What is the rate of students exiting special ed?
Right, I don't know. I can find that out for you. I don't know off the top of my head. Any other questions?
Just a couple on in the packet that we received, it was page 14, it talks about supporting students, and it says suicidal ideation. Can you explain what that is?
Sure, so it's if a child says to someone, or it's reported to us by somebody that somebody's talking about harming themselves.
Okay. And my second question is, can you explain the role of a behaviorist as compared to a psychologist or a social worker?
Sure. So they go through some very specific and intensive training to be able to analyze behavior, you know, what's the antecedent, what's the behavior, what's the consequence, and kind of narrow down what's happening with the student, and then in turn create a behavior plan that will teach the child more appropriate responses to whatever the trigger is for the child. Their training is extensive. They're very skilled. We have 3 in district right now. And they go in and they work in a lot of our programs, and then they will go in and work with individual students for whom the school team has kind of gotten stumped and they need some new ideas and how can we strengthen this behavioral program. And so they're very specific to students with acting out behavior.
Okay, so but they're not a psychologist, right?
No.
They're more similar to a social worker, but specialized?
Well, I can tell you that the behaviors that we have in district were special ed teachers first.
Okay.
And then they went on for
Okay.
this CBA.
All right, that's helpful.
So my recollection from the original work of the DMC and the report was that a lot of this has to do with changing mindset across the board, with teachers, staff, as well as parents. Are you finding that parents are more open to, for instance, knowing that their students going to exit special education? Or I think there was a time when parents kind of held on to that. How do you see that progressing? Where do you see that going?
I think we have work to do in that area to help. I think we have to talk more about promoting independence and how vital it is, because I think sometimes we get focused on our job is to get kids to graduation, and that is not what IDEA is about. It's about getting kids ready for life. And if you change just that trajectory for what its purpose is, special ed's purpose, it changes how you would look at something like that. Because of course you want to keep supports in place if the goal is to get the kids to graduation, which is our goal, of course. But if you think about how are we going to be able to teach this child some skills to move to independence and fade back our support so that when they do leave us, they're as independent as possible. So we have work to do in that area for sure. And we are very focused on transition planning and professional learning with our staff to help them actualize that, realize that, think that way too. And then we will continue to work with parents. I know Eric did a workshop with parents this year specific to that, but we know we need to do that a lot more.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Just Federico. Just one more follow-up on the current recommendation about a 0.5 behaviorist per school. You said that was not feasible for the district. Just, is that something you would see a need for, or just something that?
Not with the social workers we have in the buildings.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay.
But the number of social workers we have in our buildings is more than what DMC recommended, for example. But then I can kind of look at the two and say, okay, well, we won't have a behaviorist in every school, but we have this, and they really do serve in that role as the first layer of a behavioral plan, and they're good at it, but sometimes they need the expertise of the behaviorist to come in and help.
Okay, so one is offsetting the other. Okay.
Yeah, that's how I see it right now anyways, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay. So we are going to take a look at, actually Mr. Burt was going to do a review of the data, and before he does that, I would just say that, you know, the data that you're about to see is, disappointing. I mean, it's certainly not where we want to be with our students with disabilities. And we know that we have work to do for sure. One of the things that I just wanted to quickly point out is if you look back in your DMC packet, you'll see some CMT data, and then we're going to show SBA data tonight. The CMT, when the CMT was taking place, they had different out-of-level tests for students with disabilities, and they had the checklist, and it could encompass up to about 10% of the special ed population. And now the SBA doesn't allow for that. It will allow exemption of about 1% of our population. And I tell you that not as an excuse at all, but just important to know moving forward. And I think what's going to be helpful is when we compare SBA to SBA to SBA. I think it's going to be a really difficult thing to look at the CMT data in the report and try to make any connection with the this SBA data that we're going to show tonight. Okay? All right.
Go back one. So a couple other points to remember, and as Carol said, there's no correlation. It's very difficult to draw any correlation between the CMT cap and the Smarter Balance. Also remind folks at the high school level, we had it capped in 10th grade. We still have the capped science for the next year or so. They moved to Smarter Balance for 1 year, and then moved to the SAT, and now we're going to be in the second year of the SAT for our 11th graders in about a week. So they'll be taking the SAT, all of our juniors. So in reality, we have about 2 years of data that we can look to with some fidelity. As you get more years of data, it becomes more reliable, because you can then say, okay, this is giving us some trends. As we get more familiar with the data, as well as the assessment, as well as our students get more familiar with the assessment. So, and again, as Carol said, different percentages of our students with disabilities are being tested at this time. I'm going to focus right now on ELA, and if you recall from a couple of previous presentations, There's two measurements we're going to look at. We're going to look at a cut score, or achievement score, and then we're going to take a look at a growth score. Predominantly, we're going to focus on SBA, the state assessment, grades 3 through 8 for ELA. This is a bar graph that represents students with disabilities and those students without disabilities. The blue would be students with disabilities, and then the orangish color would be students not identified with disabilities. The grades are at the bottom, grade 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Again, this is ELA, and this is a percentage of students that have met that goal. As you recall, there's 4 levels that they report out on. Level 3 is a goal, so this would be level 3 and level 4. This is 2 years ago. This is spring of 2015 ELA. As you can see, we're ranging somewhere between 40 and 50 point gap between these two different groups. Sure.
Do we know how this compares to comparable school districts?
The one difficult thing with this is if you go to the state website and you start disaggregating by grade, even with our data, it's blacked out, if you will. Because, and one of the things, thank you for bringing that up, one of the cautionary tales I have to tell you is that the orange bar can represent 350 or 400 students. The blue bar can represent 40. So if you have a shift of 4 students, you've now gone up 10% in that blue bar, whereas opposed if you do 4 students in the orange bar, you've only gone up 1%. So we have to be careful with these percentages, that making too many judgments, but obviously overall we want to see these groups increase. We want to see the gap decrease over time, and we overall want to see the achievement for all students to go up. So to your question, if I go on the state website, which is only my access for other districts, I wouldn't be able to compare because after you get under a certain, I believe it's under 20 students, it does not show that data. I mean, I could ask them for that data as a possibility, but they would have to be willing to share that as long as we share our data as well.
Am I reading it correctly that the slide before 3s would become this slide's 4s?
Correct. I did not do cohorts here. Just strictly, this is year over year. This is 14-15, and then this is 15-16. So yes, if you wanted to look at grade 3, which is at 59 on the orange bar, they're at 70 now in grade 4. If you want to look at the blue bar in grade 3 at 11% and to 7% in 4th grade. But again, cautionary tale there, we're talking 30 to 40 students. 1 or 2 students difference would account for those percentage points. In either case, the gap is still there. We've not over 2 years decreased the gap, somewhere between 40 to 50 points. So in this case, again, this is reading, I did not do math, I just wanted to demonstrate the gap, is similar. This is, I wanted to pull out just the students with disabilities because we've been talking about that group. This is not cohort data again, this isn't, those 3rd grade students that moved up to 4th grade, this is 3rd grade to 3rd grade. Seeing some movement up, 7th and 8th grade, some movement down, 4th grade. In general, because we're talking very few students, it's hard to make conclusions. Ideally, though, all of these groups should be making greater gains than what we're seeing here. So that's something, as Carol's last bullet point said, we're looking at our delivery model, we're looking at interventions for all students to ensure that we're seeing greater achievement on these pieces. Sorry, I did include math, I apologize. Similar situation here, overall achievement is lower. This is something we talked about in the fall when we talked about math achievement. And then the gap, again, still consistent between, as compared to ELA and to reading, again, between 50 to 40 point gap depending upon the grade level. 2 years ago, in 2014-15, same bar graph, percentage of students at goal. This is last school year, 15-16, same thing. Overall, we're seeing an achievement increase, as I described back in the fall, but the gap is not decreasing. So pull out just our students with disabilities, seeing some, again, year over year, but not true cohort data. And this is something that I wouldn't put a lot of significance in because our numbers are so low. So it's something that we're going to have to track further over time. Different set of data to look at that we talked about before was this idea of growth. And if you recall from my presentation on Smarter Balance, each individual student gets a growth target regardless of level. These students here, this is strictly the number of students that have met that cut score by grade level. Okay? Similar to, we talked about the SAT, did they reach 600? In this case, did they reach, say, 2,400 in 4th grade in math? Yes or no? That's all this is. So a significant portion of our students did not meet that level. Growth, however, for both, I'm going to do Smarter Balance in this case, as well as NWA, says each individual student has a growth target. You want to grow 40 points, you want to grow 60 points, depending upon your starting point. And so this is going to tell us differently. This is something that we are valuing, and I believe the state is valuing, as we saw in the Next Generation report, is that growth model is weighted more, because what you're doing is you're focusing on every single student. We can't hide students in this model. You have to grow all students. And in this case, we're seeing less of a gap, although ideally, again, we want all of our students close to 100% at their target. So we have a lot of room to go with this. And the way to read this chart, you can see across the top, the first column, labeled column is students with disabilities. The second column is students not labeled as students with disabilities. And again, so out of all of this, I combined all the grades. In this case, Smarter Balance, grades 3 through 8. So of all of our students, approximately, I want to say 500 students, 36% of them met their growth target. And then all the other students, 49%. This is not great numbers in any shake, but you can see that the gap is smaller. Yes, sir?
Are the growth targets for students with disabilities and students with non-disabilities the same?
Correct. There is no difference. So if we're both starting at a level 2 in math, and we're both, level 2-1, remember it's a lower level, we both might have 60 points to gain. So again, you cannot hide, there are no accommodations to this, and again, we are testing 99% of our students for this measurement. So this is a very strong measurement, and this is something that we need to make significant growth in. Math, stronger growth, again, this is across all grade levels, 3 through 8. And a much smaller gap. The bottom row there, between 59 and 68%. That means our interventions are working in some cases, that we're really paying attention to all students to grow them. I did the same thing. Unfortunately, I was unable to separate out, so it's not the same slide as previously. The first labeled column is students with disabilities, and then that's everybody. They're not separated out. So this would be, the students in the first column are included in the second column. But I wanted to give you a sense, is there some comparison with NWA? We're seeing better results in language arts here. In regards to growth, this is spring to spring. I apologize, the last slide, as you recall, was the spring of 14 to the spring of 15 to the spring of 16. This is the same time frame, spring to spring, same years, but this is now all tested students. This is capturing a greater portion of our students. This is K through 8. I did not get the high school captured in here. So we've now included K through 3 in this. And so what we're seeing there, it doesn't include K because they don't have a year's growth. I apologize, grade 1 through 8. But we're seeing a much smaller gap. So these are the things that we are focusing on that we need to make sure. And then ultimately what happens as we focus in on growth, we should see the achievement levels increase. That is essentially where we are placing our bets. So, before I take any final questions, I do want to thank all the staff that came out this evening. I'm sure Carol and I both agree that it's a great show of support for this, as well as your contribution. I'm sorry that the 3 staff members left before I was able to thank them, but we'll get around to them. So, and your stamina, well done. Thank you.
I have a quick question. The students with disability, so these are students that have been pulled out of the high needs category, correct?
Correct.
So it's smaller than high needs category.
Correct. The state typically reports as high needs. We're able to disaggregate that further.
Mrs. Krasinski?
In this packet that you gave us from the District Management Council, there was a statistic in here that started out that Milford, back in 2011, only 1 in 5 elementary students with disabilities is above goal, and 30% of regular education students also struggle. Do we know if we're in that, where we are compared to that statistic now?
And what subject was that? I apologize.
It's in reading.
And I don't have that in front of me. So this is reading, essentially, grade 3. 15% at goal on the Smarter Balance for students with disabilities, and 66% of students not identified at goal.
The only thing that I would say is, if my memory serves me correctly, this was mildly and moderately disabled students.
Okay.
Because that's the whole focus of the special education in this report.
Correct.
So that's different than, this is all but 1% of special
Yeah,
education
I was
students.
just wondering, and I'm guessing that we don't have a way to, because of the different testing now, to be able to
Correct.
compare apples to apples.
Right, I mean, that's the thing that's just really frustrating, because
Because it was
we
just.
believe that this is reflective of that 10% kind of being pulled out, and then also then zeroing in on the mildly and moderately, which may have pulled out even more kids, we're not sure. But this is 99% of special
Right.
education.
It would just be nice to see if the things that have been put in place over the last 3 or 4 years.
Have made a difference.
Yeah, if you could compare.
So I know it's very hard because they're
Yeah.
totally apples to oranges. But your sense, do you have a sense? Do you have a sense of, are we in better shape than we were?
I guess
I will
I
speak
wanted
to
to
it,
refer-
I'll just.
I was going to say, maybe to ask Mrs. Courier, or to ask Mrs. Swift, I mean, you were principal, et cetera, you know, what your sense is in the building, whether or not special ed students are performing at higher levels than they had been.
You know, again, I think it's going to be hard to really look at it if you're looking at the measures that we're quantifying with SBA or with other things, and also to kind of track those kids over time. I will tell you that I think the things that have been put in place and to the level of consistency that we're now working at, which this DMC audit really counted, so as we're looking at fluency assessments, as we're looking at NWEA, we're gathering more speed and helping to provide those interventions. You know, I think it really determines as to, does it help us set higher expectations and higher goals for students? Sure. But if they have 40 points of growth to go to get to grade level, you know, whereas a typical peer might have 10 points to grow each year, you know, you're trying to close the gap, but you're not going to see that at a year-to-year over time. So when I look at teacher goal setting and when I'm working with staff, regular ed or special education teachers, we're really drilling down to looking at a variety of forms of data. You know, we're not only looking at the standardized, we're looking at the more systematic pieces too, sight words, pieces that they're looking at the daily basis to make their IEP goals and objectives. I guess I really can't give you a one clear-cut answer. Have we seen growth? Absolutely. If we hadn't seen growth, we would have to really change the models that we're doing and moving kids forward. Will it show up on some of these standardized measures as much as I'd like them to see and as quickly as a time? I don't think it's showing that, but will we get there? I'd like to believe so. And I do know that as we continue to have PPTs and meetings with parents, I'm seeing kids grow to continue to grow into the curriculum measure. So I can use that as a way to say, yes, we're continuing. Mrs. Swift, I don't know if you can add further.
I was reflecting on your question, and I think when I first became a principal, kids were very quiet in class. And then we instituted the teacher evaluation system that defined what good instructional practice looks like and what kids should be doing. And when we instituted that, we knew that kids needed to be talking, they needed to be sharing their thinking, so we knew what was going on with them. That combined with our workshop model that also allows kids a lot of time to talk about what they're learning and what they're thinking, I think has made a huge difference for special ed kids in particular, who typically pulled out a lot more and were in those one-on-one or one-on-two settings, and now they're in classrooms where, and even when they're pulled out, we know that kids have to be engaged in talking. And so I would say, even if we just consider those two factors alone, absolutely, I think kids are doing better because they're engaged and involved much more so. All kids, but special ed kids as well, much more involved in participating than they were in the past when it was a lot more teacher-directed instruction.
If I can just add one more thing, I think the hardest piece to this is a lot of what the state comes out with is that you're kind of chasing what is coming next. And I think what we need to know is that each year for those children to advance onto that next grade level, as those benchmarks are rising, your expectations are rising. So children are growing through that, but as the state continues to kind of look at these assessments in different ways. I think that continues to kind of make the playing field a little uneven to get one set standard. But as you think of each year, where do they need to grow? I do think they're growing into those marks. I think it's just how do we measure it that makes it a little bit more difficult in terms of this.
Questions, Dr. Gregory?
So I want to thank everybody for answering some of the questions I had emailed before. I'm just left with one question, sort of the how do we move forward? Like how are we moving towards closing that gap? And I don't know that it has an answer that's going to come right now. But the actionable items of, this is our target for the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next year. What are we doing specifically to move things forward is of interest to me.
That's a big answer. Yeah.
Other questions? Federico?
I just want to quickly say thank you to all of you for the presentation, for all the thorough explanations, answering our question, and for all the work that you do with our students. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I found the pre-information that you sent us very helpful. Very, very helpful. That kind of laid out all the different pieces of the special program. So thank you for that. Is that something that you did just for us, or is it something, a working document that you're?
Well, it was something I needed to do for me when I took over the job and said, so what makes up this department?
All right.
So once I got it on paper, I realized that
it's very helpful.
If I get that, other people may not too.
All right, thank you. We still have a little bit of our agenda, but I'm guessing staff would like to go home.
How close?
What am I talking about? She's not talking about the big time. She's talking about a small league.
Another championship.
Was that a championship? 10 points. Oh, 32 to 42.
They
She
shot
made a
to the-
basket.
Oh, look at that.
Okay. Thank you. We have our policies.
We do. So the next agenda, our final agenda item, is we're bringing forth actually 4 policies to you for a first reading. At our last meeting, when we deferred this to this meeting, we had only brought forth 3. But we were then able to, we had received back the reporting of child abuse, policy 5141.4. So we added that to the agenda here. So I'll go through each of these. I just want to underscore that every one of these policies are mandated by law. So some of the language may seem a little less common language, but that's because it's in the law. Our attorneys have looked at the reporting of child abuse, the suicide prevention, and the use of physical force. Concussions, as I indicated at the last meeting, we had Dr. Carlson and the health department look at that policy. So the first one here before you is reporting of child abuse. And the one thing I want to say to you is there are some, okay, what's the term I'm looking for? Mrs. Griffin, help me out. Some changes that we know are just like where. Oh, housekeeping? Housekeeping, right. Where you have the word Board of Education and maybe it should be a superintendent, or you have parents and you don't have guardians. So we know that we've already picked up some pieces that we missed when we brought these to you. But there are some other things that I also want to point out to you when we moving through these. So for example, this policy on child abuse, neglect, and sexual assault, a question that was posed to us is that the opening paragraph has to do with sexual assault by an employee. So the question that was posed is, well, is this whole policy about sexual assault by an employee? And it clearly is not. In actuality, the third paragraph on this page 16, or 1 of 5, should be the first paragraph. Because it says the board requires all school employees and other mandated reporters as defined in this policy who have reasonable cause to suspect or believe that a child under the age of 18, et cetera, has been abused or neglected. So it's the general, every employee of the school system. And it isn't specifying who's doing the sexual assault. It's that if you feel that this should be, that you have reason to believe that there may be sexual assault, you're mandated to report. So that paragraph, just so you know, that third paragraph really should be paragraph 1, followed by paragraph 2, followed by paragraph 3, and we'll make that change. Because that makes it much, much clearer that this is about everybody, but it's also, and it's important that it is in here, that there is a paragraph that talks about if the assault should be by an employee. Okay? The other thing is that on the next page, the title training requirements should actually go before the last paragraph on that page. Because that paragraph there, any school employee or the mandated reporter as described in this policy that in good faith makes a report, doesn't have anything to do with training. It has to do what's above it, which is the section on reporting procedures. So again, sorry about that, but that training requirement should go before that last paragraph, because you can see the opening sentence, the board shall provide in-service training to each school employee, et cetera. So with respect to the policy, that's the only piece. I mean, we can answer questions. Actually, Mr. Swift would answer most of these questions. Child abuse policy has been in existence for a long time. What has changed, I think, over the years has been who is the mandated reporter. I mean, I do remember years ago, it was really professional staff that were the mandated reporters, and the definition has changed dramatically, that it is all employees. So anyone who suspects is a mandated reporter. And there's procedures, you know, in place in the schools to support, because some people would feel really uncomfortable with how do I go about reporting, et cetera, you know, be it a custodian or, you know, cafeteria worker, et cetera. So there's supports in place to work with that person. But the reality is every single employee in the school system is a mandated reporter around child abuse and sexual assault. The other piece is, the piece on sexual assault is new here, in the sense of this is part of the, some of this is the new language that is coming in, because there's a greater emphasis also being given to the sexual assault piece in terms of child abuse. So, I don't know if anybody has any immediate questions.
Mr. Westerman?
I was pleased to hear that you indicated that there are supports in the schools for the mandated reporter, because I mean, as I read this, I felt this overwhelming sense of fear that if I happen to see something, you know what, I don't want anything to do with this, you know? And I could understand how some person, especially not particularly trained in or focused on those kind of responsibilities, might be very reluctant to come forward because they're going to be entangled in this, you know, requirement to, you know, write reports and, you know, take a lot of time and energy and effort that could make them reticent to you know, want to say, oh, I see something. So I think it's important that there be not only the supports in place, but that every employee who is affected by the requirement to do the reporting clearly be told and understood that, you know, they're not going to face this burden alone, that there's going to be people who will help make sure that the appropriate forms are filled out and the T's crossed, I's dotted, and things like that. And they don't have to be exceptionally concerned about getting caught up in spending you know, the next 4 years of their life, you know, testifying and filling out forms and all that kind of good stuff, which, you know, you read this and it's daunting, you know, just in terms of.
Well, just so you know, I mean, it's mandated that we provide training every year. So a lot of it is a refresher training, but it's to remind people what the obligation is. And part of that obligation is to assure people that, you know, there are avenues they can pursue, you know, if they're uncomfortable with doing it alone. But the flip side of it is also basically to underscore to all employees, this is mandated by law, and if you don't report, you are in trouble, you're breaking the law.
Right.
And that's taken very seriously.
Well, I understand it, but it's still daunting and
Oh, it
getting
is,
people quite.
absolutely. And it's, you know, it's a little, it's.
Quite uncomfortable with
Correct,
this, with
absolutely.
this process.
That's right.
I mean, it's one thing to go to the principal and say, you know, I think something is wrong here. And it's quite another to say, oh, I gotta, you know.
Right, put my signature on a document that says.
And
yep.
fill out 40 pages of forms and, you know.
Yeah, it's actually, the forms aren't so cumbersome as much as what's intimidating is that I'm reporting.
Right.
On
well, I
something.
mean, as citizens, we need to stand up for
children,
for the children and for, you know, following the law. Nonetheless, you know, it's just, when you put it down in writing like that in such detail, it gets to be a little intimidating.
Intimidating, absolutely. Agreed. So the administrative regulation here
Dr.
is.
Peter, I think Mrs. Federico has a question.
I'm
on
sorry.
that.
I'm sorry, just a quick question about the language, because it seems a little unclear to me. So on page 3 of 5, the last paragraph, it says, "The board will not employ an individual who is terminated or resigned if he or she," and then it lists some criteria. So that means terminated or resigned from Milford or from any district, right?
Any district.
Okay.
Any district, right. Which we might be able to find out, because now, you know, when we go to hire somebody, we're supposed to request from the other district if there's any disciplinary issues or, you know, anything, you know, in the person's background that, you know, in the personnel file that really would call into question this person's.
Okay.
So then, going through the administrative regulation, which is quite lengthy, you know, as you can see, there's some housekeeping pieces in here where there should be the term superintendent versus board, et cetera, but, you know, we will make sure that we clean that up. I don't believe that there's any, I think the rest of it, I think, just stands as is. So,
Any questions on that? And the AR?
the only I should say, piece that we did, if you turn to page 11 of 13 or page 31, when it talked about, I'm under M, confidential central office crisis team. And if you go to the second paragraph, the confidential central office crisis team consists of a local teacher or other professional staff member. We added or other professional staff member. And then in rereading it today, Ms. Swift and I, we were rereading this based upon some questions that had been asked. This goes on to say the superintendent, a local police officer, and any other person the Board of Education or its designee deems appropriate. We thought a local police officer and/or the coordinator of school safety and security. I mean, we have this person who works for us, who's our coordinator of school safety, that, you know, Jeff Nielsen said it would seem appropriate that that he would be a part of this confidential team as well.
Would it be the SRO rather than a local police officer?
Well, again, what was given to us from the attorneys is it said a local police officer. So our thought was, well, a local police officer and/or.
But the local police, SRO is also a local police officer.
It is. It is.
They're police officers. They're not,
right.
You know,
Right, I just.
Because this is a central
Because it's
office
something
team.
with our-
It's a central office team versus a school-based team, right? This is a central
This
office
is
team.
a central office team, that's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. The part where it gets a little bit, what shall I say, a little uncomfortable, for the sake of conversation, if there was, it was suspected that there was child abuse that was conducted by an employee on a student, the police are going to do an investigation, but coupled with that, we need to do an investigation as well. So from that perspective, for the internal investigation, we would not involve the police because the police is doing their own investigation. And that's what prompted the thought that we would put in here our own coordinator of school safety. Because the school system needs to conduct its own investigation, but meanwhile, when there's a child abuse case, but at the same time, the police may also be conducting an investigation, so.
Are you thinking that having a police officer on the internal investigation might compromise one or the other investigations?
Under those circumstances, it could, we always have to be careful that we're not compromising a police investigation, but meanwhile, if they're conducting an investigation, then we wouldn't have them be part of an internal, it would be our internal investigation. You know,
So you would put in an or for the local police officer, or?
I put and/or.
And/or.
Right.
Okay.
That was our thought.
Any questions?
The next policy is the suicide prevention policy. Again, this is a revised policy. And you can see that the black language is the original. And this is followed by the administrative regulation, which this regulation is really a replacement, complete replacement of what had been in existence. So the question that was raised, one question on this policy and AR, you notice that on the policy, the second last paragraph, it says any school employee who may have knowledge of a suicide threat or attempt must take the proper steps. And attempt was crossed out, but meanwhile in the AR, there was an oversight on the first sentence. It was not crossed out. We felt it should be crossed out because a threat is, an attempt is a threat. If someone's attempting, but they failed, it's a threat of actually doing this. So we thought it was redundant, and so we went with what the attorneys had suggested, which was to cross out or attempt.
Can I make a comment on that?
Sure.
To me, there are two different things, because a threat could be, I'm going to kill myself, or whatever, I'm going to hurt myself, and an attempt is actually the trying to hurt yourself. So I see them as two different things.
Correct, but attempt is not precluded from threat. I think the emphasis here is that if you even have knowledge of the threat of it, you must take the proper steps to report this information. This is, again, the focus of this paragraph is around the obligation on the part of the staff to report it to the building principal. That you can't just assume, well, you know, they made a comment, but it's just a comment kind of thing. So that's, I'm thinking, I'm not, I mean, we could ask the attorney for their interpretation of that, but I think it was more the idea that any threat, which an attempt is a threat, but you know, that you have to report, you cannot sit on that information.
You know, if the attorney said it doesn't have to be in there, then that's fine. I was looking as much to the fact that there was not consistency between the policy and the AR.
sorry.
Mrs. Krasinski?
I just have one question or comment on page 5 of 6 of the, I guess it's the AR. The management of suicide, if that happens. The one thing that I noticed that wasn't in here was notification to parents and family, maybe as part of the action plan, may include some kind of notification to parents about what is going to occur at the school.
Under the action plan?
Yeah. Just as I read it, it was, if anything like that were to ever happen and there was counseling provided to students or students were told, I would think that parents should be notified that this is going to happen so that when their student comes home, they know what information was given to their child so that they are prepared to deal with it at home as well.
So let us kind of work with that as to what, I hear what you're saying, and we obviously would do that, and we, sadly to say, dealt with that, in this district, so we would want to, we certainly would want to keep parents informed. So it's to include notification of parents in any plan that would be put together.
Yeah, or if it was something like that.
There is also another question. I can find it. I remember when a student has the intent to kill him or herself. I'm trying to.
The AR at the end of the third sentence.
On page 4.
Under documentation, page 1 of 6. On the AR, under documentation, special issues and user procedures under documentation.
Right, and so in the middle of the paragraph, it says, following an incident of suicide ideation, attempted or completed suicide, a daily log must be maintained. And the question was, if the suicide actually occurred, what would be included in the daily log? And in speaking with Mrs. Swift, what she indicated is that all the steps that are taken if a suicide occurs, if counseling is brought in, if, particular groups of students who might be targeted, so in the best sense of the word when I say that. So who are, the identification of who are all the friends of the student who took his life, or her life, et cetera. So that's the kind of log that, in case there was ever any question about, well, what steps did you do? Notification of parents, all of that is part of a log.
So you're looking to find ways to provide some mediation to at-risk students following such an event.
And the supports that are necessary, and also just maybe the school as a whole, whatever is, that kind of a thing, absolutely.
Mr. DeGrego?
Yeah, Dr. Fiza, that's a good point you just made about group or a certain segment of the school population that might be affected. Because I remember in the early 80s, there were so many suicides among young adults in the high schools that Billy Joel came out with a song, Don't Worry, You'll Get Your Second Wind, to help combat that. And I can remember when that happened. Even Roy Rogers came out with a song, Hang On Partner, Good Things Are Gonna Happen to You. Just to, it was like such a big thing. I think it was like 83 or 82. For some phenomenal reason, there was, every other day you read in the daily news, suicide. Suicide was just, I think if, like you said, if you can target ahead of the curve and get counselors on hand to treat students that may be in similar situations, I think we'll be fine. Thank you.
Thank you. The next policy and AR is I guess it's just a policy, excuse me, is on concussions. So there is no change in this from 2 years ago when the board passed it. And again, it was reviewed and we're in sync with
Wow, no change in the law, huh?
no changes in the law. No. And the last one that's being brought forth to you, which is which is somewhat lengthy, is the use of physical force. So you have both a policy and you also have an administrative regulation. And on page, there is one change, more than housekeeping. On page 5 of 6, the box up at the top under number 2 is pretty redundant to what's either said above it or what's said below it. So what we did is we will be crossing out that box, and the opening sentence will say, the creation of a plan to be implemented no later than July 1, 2017, by which the superintendent or his or her designee will provide school professionals, blah, 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 with training and professional development regarding the prevention of incidents requiring physical restraint or seclusion of students. So it's just condensing those two. And then there's an administrative regulation that follows this, which is 10 pages. And here there are only a couple of housekeeping pieces. So, for example, there's a reference in here to the Director of Special Education in this district. The title is Director of Pupil Personnel Services, so we will change that. On the top of page 7, number 3, the opening sentence there, we took out the board will create and said the creation of a plan to be implemented again not later than July 1, 2017, requiring the training of all. We inserted appropriate school professionals, paraprofessional staff members, etc., regarding the proper means of physically restraining or secluding a student. So there's a distinction between being trained in physically restraining and being trained in prevention of, which is what number 2 is on the page before, which that box would come out again. But what we're saying is that everyone would be trained in prevention. So students, if a student is really out of control, you want someone to help do what they can. But the flip side of it is there would only be designated people who would be trained in the use of physical force. I think I've said this to you before, and actually it's before the legislature right now to change the language. The language in the law says everybody's to be trained in how to do physical restraint. We do not want everybody trained in how to do physical restraint. Absolutely positively don't. So the law is going to be changed, we're hoping, back to appropriate people. Everybody would be trained in preventing and kind of be knowledgeable, but there would only be designated people who would be trained in actually using physical restraint. Or if you want to add anything to that, Ms. Swift.
No, you captured it perfectly.
Okay. I don't know if there's any questions anyone has. We'll show in green the changes that we make to the red, so you can see that, and make sure and change those paragraphs, that kind of thing. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate.
All right, public comment? Speakers may offer objective comments about school operations and programs. The board encourages speakers not to express personal complaints or defamatory comments about the Milford Board of Education personnel or any person associated with Milford Public Schools. Security issues and matters relating to negotiations and grievances will not be permitted. Consistent with the principles of the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act, discussion of students is prohibited absent parental waiver. Please note, public comment is limited to agenda items only at this meeting. We appreciate your stating your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Kathy Gurney, 96 Centennial Drive. 3 comments. Having been the parent of the recipient of attending a parent-teacher conference and having a teacher tell me, I have no idea because I don't work with your student, I have to tell you tonight's presentation was awesome to hear the collaboration. It is wonderful to hear that kind of work going on. The second thing I had a question on is there's a lot of training that has taken place. I'm just curious about substitute teachers, particularly long-term substitute teachers. I'm hoping they would get that same kind of training, especially long-term. And the third thing I have is about the mandated reporting. As a chaperone for my daughter's school, we have to do Connecticut mandated reporting training, and we actually have to get certified before we're allowed to be anywhere near kids or help out in the school, chaperoning, anything like that. Any type of work with the kids, anyone who's going to be with the kids. I'm just curious whether or not Milford has that, because it is done by the state and it is an online thing. It does not cost anything, and it is it's this and more. So I'm just curious whether or not that's being done right now. But I know at my daughter's school, if you want to help out, you want to be in the school, you need to take that training. So it's just a thought.
Your daughter is not in Milford, correct? A different school system?
She's in New Haven. I can't say that for all New Haven schools, but I know it's for her school. We were required to go through that training.
Thank you. All right, no other public comment, obviously, there's nobody else here, so I'll take a motion to adjourn.
All right, motion to adjourn.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
No violence. No violence.